All right, so we'll do introductions really quickly. I'll let Eric go first, and then I'll kind of go, and we'll roll right into the presentation. But Eric, I'll let you go first.
All right, thanks, Joe. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Eric Schultz. I'm a senior software engineer at Capital One. I'm a team lead right now. I manage the rest of the folks on my team. Our role is really focused on cloud engineering and cloud compliance as well. And we try to do that while improving the developer experience. So building tools that makes it very easy to be compliant and secure. And I have experience with several different cloud platforms and managing several different enterprise workloads as well. And also I'm based in the Wilmington, Delaware office of Capital One. And I reside like an hour north of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
All right, awesome. And yeah, I'm Joseph Scholz, and so I'm an Agile lead. You have your kind of cut and paste description up there of who I am, but I've worked with Eric for over 2 years now, and this is one of the first things that we ever did together, what we're presenting tonight. Before we get into that, thank you for having us. Really excited. Eric and I were talking about it last week, saying like, oh man, we're going to come back from, the long weekend and get to present right away. So we were pretty excited for it. And you all just do an amazing job. So between the organization, Josh, organization of the meetup, and then Josh reaching out to us, and so organized, you could be the template for how to run a meetup. So just, all the accolades for you all and the job you do. And thanks for having us. All right, so moving along to what we're here for, quick agenda. So we're going to go over the background of, why we did this, what the circumstances were leading up to it. We're going to go over the Agile Intent, which is what I'll handle because that's my kind of area of expertise. And then Eric's going to go over the solution of how we really made it happen and implemented it on the automation and coding side using some of the Python solutions as well. One thing I like to do is just called a power start. So it kind of frames the meeting or whatever we're doing. So the purpose, we created some of this automation for validating our cloud compliance, integrated it with Agile principles. And we wanted to present on this because we think regardless of what like Agile framework you have or what workflow framework you have, you could use something like this at scale. So hopefully what you get out of this, the O is Agile approach on how to integrate APIs. We're going to use Jira, but you could really use anything that has an exposed API, excuse me, and how to automate compliance workflow, specifically for us, utilizing Boto 3, the AWS SDK. So what's in it for you? Just ideas for solutions for your team, for your enterprise, whatever it might be. How to make sure you stay secure in the cloud. Engagement, it will be a little bit different than some of our other times we've presented on this. So we'll be monitoring the Zoom chat. And if you do have a question, just post it in there. If we can get to it real time, we might just type an answer, or we might just be able to like interrupt the chat or the talk really quickly and answer it. Either way, we'll make sure we kind of scroll through the chat and make sure any of the questions that you might have had gets answered either during or afterwards. And hopefully we'll have some fun conversations and discussions afterwards. And then roles and responsibilities. Our responsibility as presenters, obviously, provide some hopefully useful and relevant material. And as attendees, you'll have to customize some of this to your use case, but then also write down any questions that you might have, again, just reiterating for the engagement part. So that's our power start. And I will hand it over to Eric to go over the background piece of what kind of got us thinking about this in the first place.
Thanks, Joe. So the first opportunity that we potentially had, or that we did have with our experience of enforcing different cloud compliance controls, was that just the amount of notifications you were receiving. So Joe, can you click? There you go. So the main The main problem that we ran into was that people were receiving way too many notifications for specific items. So let's say they create a new resource in the cloud and they receive 5 different emails because they just did everything completely wrong. They're not going to look at those 5 separate emails just because it's too many things to be made aware of, and it's just people aren't always reading their email directly as well. So we kind of call this the white noise effect. And as you can see here, this is just an example of what can happen if you have an enterprise tool that is, sending you emails for all of your different action items that you need to complete on your resources. I don't know about you guys, but I would personally just ignore all of these and delete all of them and probably never take a look, just because this is just very overwhelming and I don't have time to read all these emails, to be honest. So a couple other opportunities we had as well. Was that if we would email a development team and ask them to complete something, that work wouldn't be tracked or prioritized. And typically the Agile delivery lead or the Scrum Master of that team would work with the product owner so that they can pull that into their current sprint and complete the work. But through an email, there's no way to track that. The other problem that we ran into as well is that some teams might have been doing some kind of like manual validation to see if the work was complete or not. So we kind of found this as as probably our largest opportunity to enhance the whole process about how teams are notified of their resources and the action items they need to complete, and then also verifying once that work is complete.
Okay, there we go.
So then it all comes to what we built. So we essentially built an integrated solution that leverages Agile principles and single source of truth verification. As with anything, there needs to be some kind of source of truth that you can map that to know whether you need to complete an item or not, or a work item for that matter. So essentially, it's an automated workflow to map work items directly to cloud resources so that teams don't need to create any work items for the work. It's automatically created for them, and they get notification immediately so that they can prioritize it and work on it as soon as possible.
All right.
And with
awesome.
that, I'll pass it back to you, Joe, for the Agile Intent.
Sure. All right. So kind of quick, I'm going to see how many pictures I can get up here at the same time. So just a quick show of hands of like who uses any like Agile framework, or, just throw your hand up if you're doing anything like that to complete work or, okay. So we have some familiarity there. So that's what I've done for the past 4 or 5 years. And so definitely emails and spreadsheets was not what we wanted to do here. And so Eric and I really, started thinking about, well, what would be a better way to organize this? You saw that screen capture of, 25 emails within 3 days. What's relevant? What isn't? So just as a quick kind of foundation, so nomenclature that we might be utilizing here. If I say issue, it's just a generic term for any work item. It doesn't mean like a bug or a defect. I'll try not to use that term. I'll try to say like like story or task or card or something like that. Hopefully there's enough familiarity with that generic term to know that we're talking about like a work item. An epic for us and for anyone who uses Jira is just like a defined effort with a result. So we'll use a couple times Amazon machine image rehydration. Rehydration meaning just having to redeploy EC2 instances with your latest machine image that has all the updated security. So an epic for us, just as a example, might be do Amazon machine image rehydration for 30 different applications. So it's a larger scale effort. And then, as I mentioned, kind of story is just a small unit of that epic or larger work. So for a specific cloud resource, you might have a story, like I said, work item, ticket, card. We'll try to use as generic as possible, but if you hear story and epic, that's kind of what you want to think of. All right, so So yeah, in the agile world and really in the business side too, Eric mentioned product. So if you have, someone has a business intent or a project manager or product owner, they would be interested in this as well. So we wanted to take it from just a hodgepodge of emails to be able to provide some consistency, organized format. I'm not going to read all these off because we'll see them in the coming slides. We wanted to have the right context in there. So not, oh, this, I got an email, now I have to dig and search and find out what exactly I have to do. We wanted to give some autonomy and control over the creation of work. So making sure that there was single source of truth. And that'll go in two ways. That'll go with the work distribution. And then Eric, as he talks through kind of what he did on the automation side, you'll see single source of truth with the AWS software development kit. And then we wanted to get some metrics around it, get an idea of how we're doing. So those were the things that we wanted to fit into the agile side of it. Had no idea if we could do this. I remember Eric and I would just sit down on scrap paper, or we just grab a conference room and start whiteboarding. Nothing was in code. It took us probably about 2 months to get a prototype out. And we would just, hey, is this possible? Is this best practice? And just, throwing things back and forth. Honestly, it was a really cool process. I really enjoyed it. And that's how Eric and I kind of formed our working relationship. And it was a neat way to do that. But I'll go into some of those things that we wanted to figure out. So consistent format, and you'll see a lot of blurring just as, a disclaimer there, just because we have to be careful about what we can and can't show for proprietary things. But so you'll see everything that came out, we wanted it to have a consistent format. So you see this, the AMI rehydration, we knew that was the intent. We had an intent owner. So obviously we have Eric's name there for this. And then this would have been the specific resource. So we're going away from these emails to something that this would be in Jira, or if you have any type of workflow, consolidator, this would be here. It would be signed to a team, and they would get used to seeing it in this format. So it's not just lost in the mess of emails. We also wanted to be able to involve the team. So this would be something that would be a visualization of all the work that has to be done. Our team is called Jameson, so that's why you see Jameson there. But you see my picture and you see Eric's picture. And so it's really easy to see where this is in the flow of work. These are the things that we want to get done. You see this AMI rehydration again. So not only do you see it in a consistent format, but you can see how it fits in with all of your other work here. It's again, out of this scope of like in the mess of emails into something that's recognizable and the team can look at daily or whatever the cadence might be. So another best practice in being able to see the work on a consistent basis. And then the other thing is we wanted to provide that criteria. We didn't want to leave it up to the team to have to go and look and figure out what they had to do. And this is really where, the Bodo 3, we were able to leverage that, that Python piece of it, because we were able to pull from a single source of truth. Eric will go more into that, but give all these details. Again, we can't show too much of what's happened on here, but you see this acceptance criteria. For these, all EC2 instances with the old versions are terminated, and then they're brought up again using the newest Amazon Machine Image version. So it really gives teams a clear idea of what they have to do, and it allows them to prioritize as well, because you can see, okay, we don't have a due date on this one, but it would have a due date as well. So just really clear expectations allows them to fit it into their normal work stream. Oh, there we go. It was, so yeah, so you see the due dates here, makes it really clear when it was created, how much time you've had to prioritize it, and the last update. So this gave just really a lot of transparency to the process. So we talked about single source of truth. Again, there's kind of dualism there. So single source of truth on the agile aspect, and then there'll also be single source of truth on the development aspect and the automation aspect. So basically we used a Kanban board or Kanban board, depending on how you want to pronounce that word. And really we had a dedicated parent project. So all of the asks came down from this single source, this parent project, or what you might call it a parent epic, as we referenced earlier. We had a system account that was able to access all of the individual asks, so we could make updates, on an automated bulk fashion. We had the ability to update, any new resources, or if resources were remediated, we were able to, give a real-time picture, so you weren't looking at stale data. And we were able to do some customization with sorting and queries. So that was really helpful. Again, I'll say Jira because we use it, but really this would be applicable to any workflow organization tool. And then lastly, we wanted metrics. So before, Eric mentioned it, like we were doing spreadsheets, tracking was almost impossible because it was like, well, what emails have I responded to? What ones haven't? Is this a duplicate email? So we got rid of all of that, and we could easily and quickly see, because of that parent project, where we were in terms of the whole effort. So we could see where any team was, and specifically overall for the effort or the epic, how close we were to being complete. So that's what the Agile Intent gave us. Again, you're looking at the finished product, but this was just Eric and I whiteboarding, saying like, how can we make this work? And that's where Eric really kind of like went into his lab and became Dr. Frankenstein and made this amazing, leveraged a lot of automation, leveraged Bodo 3, and just did a lot of amazing stuff. And so I'm going to let him bring you through that. I guess a real quick stop. Any questions on any of that before we go into the second piece of it? Okay. We'll write down questions if you have them. We can always talk at the end. I'll bring it back over to Eric here, and Eric, you can kind of take us through what you were able to do.
Awesome, thank you, Joe. So here I'll go over essentially what we built, with all the different Agile intent and with the different requirements that we spent the hours, whiteboarding, and also using the best practices for how teams typically manage their Jira boards, and how teams typically interact on a daily basis when viewing their work items. So the initial implementation that we came up with was, we wanted to build a Python package. And this kind of ties into the source of truth that we mentioned earlier. We wanted to build reusable clients so that teams could easily pull in this package and determine if their resources were compliant or not, and just kind of have that internal open source capabilities, so teams could build these solutions, build anything custom that they want to do as well. How we ran this on AWS was we ran it on AWS Lambda, essentially as a batch job that gets triggered on a daily basis. But you can trigger it more often if you want to. But our idea there was that we would, create the stories and update them early in the morning before teams came back in and did their daily stand-up that day. And then what we use for database is we use DynamoDB on AWS, which is a NoSQL database. Typically have entries to store, which Jira stories we have open for each of the different epics that we have created. Some of the different dependencies that we rely on. At first, we started to use the Jira Python package. Since then, we've kind of shifted over to the Jira API, mainly because the Jira Python package hasn't been made up to date with all the latest features. So, we're just iterating very quickly on this solution. So, we wanted to be able to apply anything that was within the API documentation as well. So we mostly use the Jira API now. And then obviously to connect to AWS, we use the Bodo 3 package. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, and essentially the AWS SDK allows you to connect out to all your different AWS accounts that you have access to and pull metadata or even take action on your resources through the SDK. Then another one, so we use ServiceNow. So we call the ServiceNow API to gather information. This basically allows us to track our teams and who is the engineering lead, product owner, and Scrum Masters of each team, and just other metadata that we might need about a specific application and which resources they own in the cloud. So one of the first things that we built is what we call discovery clients. And its main job is to go out there and discover non-compliant or any AWS resources that need to take an action. So the main challenge with this that we found initially was, if we just had to implement this for one account, it would have been much simpler. But we have several different AWS accounts, so we're really deploying and analyzing across a whole fleet of accounts, so that we can access all that data and aggregate it together into one easy digestible outcome for teams to look at. So what we typically do is we'll have a different discovery client per AWS resource type. And the reason for that is, there's several different things that we might want to track per resource. So, an example would be, S3 is one of the different services there. We might want to make sure that it's encrypted and that it has some different required tags on each of those resources. So, so by having a discovery client per each resource, it allows us to reuse some of the capabilities that we already built in with the Bodo 3 SDK, and just kind of filter on top of that, looking for specific things that we want to make sure are true. And what the output of the discovery client is, it'll essentially, the example on the right-hand side, it'll just output, a simple JSON that is grouped by the team name. So you'll see here, it says team 1, team 2, and then each of those is set to essentially just an array of resources that that team needs to fix. So within that array, it'll have all the different metadata that it gathered from the Bodo 3 APIs. And how we determine the team is by the tags on the AWS resources. So it's essentially just metadata that you can track, but we have requirements that we'll just call it the team tag, that each resource needs to have that tag so that we can identify who owns which resource in the cloud. Then the other one, which we reuse with all of the different discovery clients, we call this the Jira Creator client. I know we're really original in the name there, but basically what this does is it takes as input the cloud control and the epic, which we'll just use encryption as an example, or rehydration, like Joe mentioned earlier, as a cloud control. And the epic that we already created for that. So basically the epic will have its own unique individual ID that we'll use to pass to this Jira creator. And then you'll also pass in the output from the discovery client, which is essentially the resources that are grouped by the team name, so that we know who we want to create stories for. So this Jira creator client is really reused for all of those so that we can have a consistent experience for all of the different controls that we're creating stories for teams, so that teams, once they get stories for one initiative or one control, it's going to be consistent amongst all of those. So the example on the right-hand side is just an example that we create one story per team. So you can see here, team 1 has something that they need to encrypt in here. And what we do for that matter is, since we run on a daily cadence, essentially determining on if you already have a story or not, it'll create, update, or close the story depending on the status of your resources. So in the chance that we run and we find that you have new non-compliant resources, we'll create a new story for you. The other time that we'll create a new story for you is that if you did have a story open, but you actually closed it too early before you actually completed the work. So we'll know that you should still have a story open because there's still resources out there that need to take action upon. So by that, we'll make sure that we hold the teams accountable for getting the work done, and that we ensure that it's done properly as well. The other thing that we do is, obviously teams they're not all going to complete the work within one day. So upon the next run, we will update the description of the story. So essentially what's included in the description is a list of resources that the team needs to address. And I'll go into further detail on that later, but that's just the update that we make. And then the other thing, as we mentioned earlier, is the automated validation when the work is complete. So the next day, if we determine that this team has no more resources that need to take action upon, we'll actually transition the story and close it out for them so that they know that the work has been completed successfully. And as I mentioned earlier, we use DynamoDB to store this information. So essentially for each Jira story that we open, we keep track of the status in our database, and we track other things like what the epic ID is, and essentially just the status of that so that we know which team has which stories open, and we can use that for the metrics that Joe was talking about previously. So now I'll go through the life of the story. We have like 5 or 6 different steps here of a story that gets assigned to a team. So obviously the first step is the creation. And as mentioned previously, we'll use Bodo 3 to gather all of the resources that need to take action upon. Then we'll filter out by the team and then create each story for that team. So in this example, I'll use the epic as like rehydration, and each team will need to address that if they need to take action upon that. And as I mentioned earlier, the description then includes the list of resources, which this may be updated on a daily basis depending on how often their resources change in the AWS account. But the whole idea here is that the team can just look directly at their story that got created and know that that's the source of truth, that that's out there, and that's what they need to fix on that given day. And they don't need to spend the time searching through the accounts, aggregating all the results together. They can just look within the story, work on that, and complete the work. So after the story is created, the next step then is the assignment. So how do we know who to hold accountable and how we assign these stories? So this is where the ServiceNow API comes into effect. So essentially each team within ServiceNow has an engineering lead who's essentially just the tech lead and who's responsible for that application. So we assign the story to them, and we also assign additional stakeholders like the product owner and the Agile delivery lead. The Agile delivery lead is usually responsible for making sure that it's brought up in each of the team's daily stand-ups, and then also the product owner is responsible for making sure that it's prioritized depending on the severity of the issue. So it might be something they need to work on immediately, or it might be something that they have other high priority work that they're working on at the time, and they can push that back a week or two to work on that. So after the assignment and the team gets the notification, then here's where we assign the epic for that story. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 1 epic per cloud control. So the story will basically get like categorized. If you aren't familiar with Jira, I guess like if you're using GitHub issues or something like that, think of it almost as like a label, but you can only have 1 label on it. So it's just to track a given group of work items together. So that we can better track like the company's overall completion status for that given cloud control. So there's 1 story per team beneath this epic, and each story is assigned that so that we can track the overall status of how many more stories are left before we are at 100%, and we can close out that epic. And then the next step after the epic is assigned to the story is the workflow progression. So the teams have the ability to, manually transition this story to whatever state they want or status they want this to be in. So at first it starts out in the backlog status, and this is specific to Jira. But then there's several different statuses within issues that they can set it to. So they can move it to in progress or any kind of other status that they might have it in. I know there's several other ones like pull request review or business analysis, and some other ones that they might move it into before they're ready to actually say that they completed the work. So then at this point, then the teams would complete the work that's assigned in the story, and then this is the closing of the story. So with the automated validation that we have, we can confirm that the team's work has been completed, and we can actually close the story so we can move it to the closed status. And we typically leave a comment on the story as well, just to let the team know that the product owner can review, the Agile delivery lead can review, just to confirm that the work is complete. And it also allows them to know that they can close out a sprint with the given work they completed during that time. But overall, this is the life of a story once you get assigned for specific compliance items. So the overall workflow, I think I touched on this briefly before, but it's just a basic workflow image that you can use. So we have a daily trigger that gets kicked off, and we use multi-processing so that each different cloud control has its own thread so that it runs pretty quickly. And then it'll use Boto 3 where it will discover all of the different resources that we need to take action on. And then we group that by the team. And then per team, you can see the example on the right-hand side that says project 1, 2, 3, 4. And here's an example for a Python upgrade from Python 2 to 3 that we had to do a couple years ago. So here's a story that that team needs to resolve, and then given the different JIRA actions, that story is created, updated, or closed. And then we store the results for that team and that JIRA story in Amazon DynamoDB so that we can track that on a daily basis. And I'll pass it back to Joe to go over the results.
Yeah, so before we go over that, so yeah, really what we're able to do here is combine a lot of Agile intent with a process that was starting out as something that was definitely not scalable, and say, how can we add automation to this to make it seamless, scalable, and consistent? And so the results that we got out of it, again, I said we kind of got a prototype. Eric and I were trying to think back. It's been a while now. Probably took about 2 months to get just a proof of concept prototype out. And then by about 6 months, we started to get a lot of traction, organized around like formal training, if you want to call it that, with the teams on how to do this. It started to get socialized, and we really started to have this as the widespread solution to making sure that everyone was kind of aware and compliant. So we got clear expectations from the teams. Everyone knew the process, the procedure. They knew what they'd have to do. They were used to seeing something new come in, understanding where to look to understand what they'd have to do, the due dates. It became second nature for teams. I have a little Band-Aid up here because we went from kind of finding out after the fact and having to react and be reactionary, so putting Band-Aids on things, to being able to actually plan. Oh, this will be due in 4 weeks. I know how to, put this into my normal work, my work stream. I know how to plan for it. We can actually be proactive instead of reactive. We got accountability and actionability. So the accountability was, Eric mentioned, we were able to leverage some of our systems of record to know exactly where to attribute this to. And actionability meant that because it was attributed to the right person in the right way, it received action much more efficiently. And then we were able to evaluate team efforts for improvement. So whether it's, hey, we didn't tell the teams exactly what they were supposed to do, or we didn't, give it enough information, we're able to iterate on that. So I don't know how many times, Eric, you've changed. It's probably in the triple digits, but we're able to get feedback, create feedback loops, and really make it an agile process for this. So it's almost like agile inception there. We for people that have seen the movie, it was kind of layers of iteration. And then tracking, really easy visibility, single source of truth in terms of that project or that epic or effort. And so really able to get a snapshot, quick view of where we are and the progress we're making. And then of course, peace of mind, the obligatory meditation photo at the end of a presentation. But really it did allow teams to not think, do I have my email filter set up right? Did I miss an email? Am I gonna get in trouble for this? They knew that if they were responsible for it, it was going to come in a controlled and designated way. So those were the results for us. Very gratifying, of course. Eric is the mastermind behind this. I kind of just answered his agile questions and he made it all happen. But it was really just an amazing collaboration. So yeah, we want to move on to questions and conversations. I never say questions and answers because I'm not sure we're going to have the answers, but we can definitely talk and have a conversation around it. And I do see some more stuff in the chat here. So I'll go on to just really quickly our contact information for Eric and myself. We're at Capital One, so we're not related. It is Joseph Scholz and Eric Schultz. you know, that gets interchanged and interposed all the time, but there it is. I know this is being recorded, and we can probably make the deck available as well. So that's our contact info. And then I will, well, I'll minimize. Let's see if I can minimize here. Okay, perfect. And then I'll go to the chat and see if there's anything, because I do see the chat happening. Okay. Yeah,
It's
that's Slack bound. So sorry, go
yeah,
ahead, Eric.
yeah. I was just saying I can answer a couple of the questions that we have in here. So I know one of them we have with the real-time trigger for capturing compliance concerns, like a S3 bucket becoming publicly accessible accidentally. So I will mention that, you know, for these JIRA stories that we're creating for teams, you know, these aren't for the super high priority ones. Well, I'm sorry, it's not the high priority ones. It's not the high security concerns. So there are other tools that we have in place to automatically resolve issues. This is for ones where it requires the development teams to take action on the resources. So let's say a team is going to delete their security group. However, a team has that security group in their auto-scaling configuration. Launch configuration. If that security group gets deleted, then their new resources will start to fail when they try to create those. So that's just kind of an example of something that we could create tickets for teams so that they can update their configuration before that security group is deleted. So hopefully that answers that question for you. Another one is from David. How do you manage the permissions required for the Discovery Client integration across all the different AWS accounts? There's a couple different ways that you can handle that. The one that you can complete is, so let's say that we have a Lambda running in one account. We can create an IAM role that has the ability to assume role to the our IAM role in all the other accounts, and you know, only given like read only access to those different accounts. So that's an option that you can do. Another one that I know they introduced, I think last year, or maybe a little bit before that, but AWS Config has the capability to aggregate data across multiple different accounts into one account. So if you already have that set up, you can actually just pull from that one account, and that has results from all the other accounts already. So several different ways that you could potentially do that. And then I think the next question that David had was, have you had issues representing the priority of the work with product group, or did due date help with that agreement?
Eric, real quick.
So Joe, I don't know if you want to cover that one.
Yes, definitely I will. But so
Yeah.
just a chance for those answers to get any feedback or, you know, feedback or follow up. So the first one you answered, Eric, I was trying to look through here. Was that from, what was the first one you addressed? Was it from James?
Yeah, the first one was about the real-time trigger for capturing compliance concerns.
Got it. Okay. So James, based on what Eric had mentioned, any kind of follow up on that, or any other further questions there?
No, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. And then David, with the Discovery Client integration and the aggregation of accounts there, make sense? Or
Yeah, that made perfect sense.
okay, cool. Sorry, Eric. That's the teacher in me coming. I taught for a year, and it's like always wanted. Like, it took me half a year to realize like I have to stop and ask if, you know, if anyone has questions. Otherwise, you know, sometimes they don't get asked. So, okay. And then David, you had issues representing the priority of work with product group, or did the due date help with that agreement? Yeah. So really great question, and we kind of leverage multiple elements here. So the due date might be based on some sort of commitment that is made, but we might also have a team that says, well, based on our you know, cycle of work, we might be able to get that done sooner, or we might be able to integrate it in with something that makes more sense, and it'll be done ahead of time, and that's just one less thing to worry about. So the due date did help. Also, I think one of the helpful things was giving lead times. And so if you give someone a day or even a week, there's going to be a lot of pushback. When the product team said, okay, we understand that this work is necessary, we want to keep information safe, it's best practice. If you're giving us lead times, or not really lead times, but if you're giving enough time to plan accordingly, we will make sure we get it planned and we think that's a fair resolution. So it was kind of a give in terms of, we understand we're not, at that time, we weren't providing a consistent way for them to see that, and they'd be getting it either late or at the last minute, or, when they got an email that was all in red instead of like the normal format. So, that consistency and that expectation of how they would see the work and be able to plan around it really allowed that to, I guess, materialize into something that was agreeable. I'm guessing, just to follow up with that, have you had trouble in any way, like getting product teams to understand the value or to recognize the value and actually take action?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a perennial problem, right? Is being able to help someone who's maybe not very technically focused kind of conceptualize risks.
Without a doubt.
Especially when you can't associate a dollar value. I think it gets a little tricky to represent prioritization. Right.
It's not how much am I going to make, but it's, do we want to risk not doing this, or, do we, so I understand a lot of people think dollar and cents, but this is like preventative measures. And so, do you want to be that next headline, or do you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your customer ahead of time type thing? All right. And then help me out with this pronunciation. Is it Indrajit?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. And so that was kind of the same thing with the daily trigger or real-time trigger, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, as I said, that was the first one. I think I mixed up. James had the question below that.
Okay. Were you able to address this one then, Eric, within that? Because I know they're both kind of trigger based, but it looks like James is a little bit nuanced.
Yeah, so James' question is a little bit different. I think he's asking, the keys I used within the DynamoDB table.
Right.
So we used the team ID, the work item ID, and then also the epic ID. So that with that data, we can make sure that it's unique for a given team, and for that given cloud control that they already have a story open to get that ID information from there. So basically, really just by knowing the epic ID and then also the team ID, you're able to get the latest story that's still in open status.
James, are you all utilizing Jira, I'm guessing?
Yeah, I heavily use Jira and AWS infrastructure. The part that I wanted more clarity on was the DynamoDB specifically. I've used it for kind of toy projects, but getting the right key structure to define data in a flexible way was kind of what I was getting at. But it sounds like you jammed several pieces together to make your key, and then you store the data for what resources are part of that key that needs to be on that Jira issue.
Correct. Yep.
Cool. That makes sense.
Yeah. And another, we restructured the database, but at first we did a very simple one where just each team would have its own record. So we'd have like a primary key of team, and then essentially for each story that they had created, each epic would have its own key within that record, so that we could track what the Jira issue ID was. But we eventually scrapped that model, and the main reason was that we couldn't track like the history of all our different Jira issues. It was only keeping the stories in there that were currently in progress or currently open before they were closed. So that's why we changed after that.
And then, James, as a follow-up on the Lambda deployments, I don't know if we can answer the second part of specifically, logically, what we would do in terms of deletion. I think that might kind of drift into proprietary. I know we kind of had a discussion with the corporate team before this about what we could or couldn't say. So, Eric, I'll lean on, I'll let you do your best judgment on that. But I think we can definitely answer the first one. Not sure about the second one, though.
Yeah, I'll just touch on it very briefly and as general as I can without really answering too many details there. But at that aspect, you can assume that it won't be the case, that it wouldn't have, you wouldn't be able to identify. You should have a way to do that because of other controls that may be in place. But then the higher order Lambda deployment tool, do we handcraft the zip files to upload to batch? Yeah, so part of our deployment, we essentially, similar to like what you do for Lambda, you do, zip up the components like that will also download the different dependencies, whether using the pip file or requirements text file, and all that will be included for you. We also started to use different step functions, which we're testing out in our test environment right now. So we are still making like several different updates to our infrastructure and then also our deployment structure as well. Do you have any more questions on that, James?
Well, I had a question that was related. How is this tied in with the cloud custodian work? It seems like you've overlapped or built some things that are like simultaneously doing the same thing as cloud custodian.
So I think for that one, we're not able to answer on that topic right now, but it is, this is unique functionality.
Yeah, so just kind of to clarify a little bit. So Cloud Custodian, not only able to talk directly to Cloud Custodian, but yeah, so we did some customization around some tools that I guess would be widely available. Would you say that would be fair, Eric? So there's some things here that, are kind of out of the box, and then there's definitely some customization built around those things. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say, so the purpose of our tool here, its purpose is to really, map existing resources in the cloud to work items so that really you have this Jira story can be the source of truth for those teams, and they don't need to spend time searching or validating for what they need to do.